I wish I could tell you that the morning this all started felt normal, that the sun rose the same way, that the neighborhood dogs barked the same way, that life carried on with its usual quiet rhythm. But that would be a lie. Because the truth is, something in the air felt off, the kind of off that crawls up your spine before anything even happens. Some people call it intuition. Others call it paranoia. I just call it experience, because where I live, peace isn't promised. Not when you have an HOA that behaves less like a community and more like a kingdom, complete with its own self-appointed queen. And her name, at least according to every whisper on our street, was Karen. Now, I'm not the kind of person who likes drama. I stay out of neighbor politics, I mind my own home, I pay my dues, I cut my grass within regulation length. Yes, the HOA has rules for that too. I'm the guy who waves at everyone and tries to keep things simple. But that morning, staring at the splintered wood and bent metal scattered across the end of my driveway, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A slow, heavy burn of anger. My mailbox wasn't just knocked down. It was destroyed. Again. Pieces of it were dragged across the gravel like someone wanted to make sure I got the message. And deep tire marks cut into the dirt beside it, the same pattern I'd seen twice before. Same angle. Same direction. Same car shape. The same person. The HOA president herself. Karen. To anyone else watching from their window, it probably looked like a simple accident, maybe just another case of someone turning the wheel too quickly. But I knew better. Everyone on the block knew better. Karen had a talent for accidents. She'd backed into Mr. Hill's trash cans 3 times. She'd clipped Mrs. Patel's garden fence by mistake. And when she didn't approve of someone's mailbox design, somehow, miraculously, it always happened to fall over within the week. But my case wasn't about design. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't even about me. At least not at first. It was about control. Because Karen didn't like that I didn't show up for her HOA meetings. She didn't like that I didn't join her committees. She didn't like that I didn't decorate festively enough during holiday season. She didn't like that I didn't bow to her imaginary throne. And knocking my mailbox down once? That was annoyance. Twice? That was a warning. 3 times? That was war. Still, I didn't say anything at first. I stood there on my driveway, breathing in the cool morning air, watching neighbors peek through their blinds. Nobody opened their doors. Nobody walked over to say a word. Around here, silence was safer. But something else happened too. Something quieter and more powerful than anger. I started thinking, not about revenge, not about confronting her, not about screaming at HOA meetings like everyone else did. I started thinking about solutions. Real ones. Permanent ones. Ones that didn't involve breaking rules but still protected what was mine. Because the truth is, you can only push a quiet man so far before he stops being quiet. So I took pictures of the wreckage. I measured the tire tracks. I recorded the angle of the hit. Not because I wanted to report it, but because I wanted to understand what I was dealing with. I knew her pattern now. I knew her timing. I knew her shortcuts. And with every detail I wrote down, an idea started forming in my mind. Something simple, something legal, something she would never expect. A mailbox she definitely wouldn't see coming. But before I could even finish sweeping up the broken wood, I heard it. The low, slow rumble of an engine turning the corner. My heart tightened. Her car. The same silver SUV with the perfect HOA-approved shine. Moving toward me. Slowing down. Windows tinted. But I could feel her eyes watching me. Judging me. Measuring whether I would crumble or react. And then, right as she rolled past my destroyed mailbox, she gave me the slightest smirk. Not a friendly smirk. A smirk that said she knew exactly what she'd done. A smirk that said she thought she'd won. But she had no idea what I was already planning. No idea what was coming next. And absolutely no idea that the very next mailbox she tried to run over might just be her last mistake. The story really begins right there, because what happened after that moment changed everything. And it didn't take long. Only one night. One installation. One unexpected twist. And that's where things got dangerous. Very dangerous. When Karen's SUV disappeared down the street, the silence it left behind felt heavier than the mess on my driveway. I kept staring at the road long after she was gone, trying to understand how a neighbor, someone who lived just a few houses away, could feel more like a threat than a part of the community. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the beginning of something bigger than a destroyed mailbox. Something personal. Something that had been building for far longer than I'd realized. Because the truth is, this wasn't the first time Karen had tried to remind me of my place. It started months earlier, almost too small to notice. A warning letter taped to my door about my trash cans being an inch outside the regulation line. A complaint about the color of my porch light, even though it matched the neighborhood guidelines. A message in the HOA group chat about my lawn needing a more uniform look. Right after I'd mowed it. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Like her voice wasn't a suggestion. It was a verdict. I tried brushing it off at first. Everyone has that one difficult neighbor, right? The one who believes they're keeping the street perfect, even if they're the only one who cares. But with Karen, it was different. There was a sharpness in her eyes when she talked, a kind of hunger for control that made your skin tighten the second she looked your way. Power wasn't something she had. It was something she collected. And somehow, for reasons I couldn't figure out, she had decided I was the next piece she wanted to bend into place. I remember the first real confrontation we had. It was early fall, cool, windy, the kind of weather that puts everyone in a good mood except her. I just stepped outside to grab a delivery when she walked up my driveway with her clipboard like she was doing a surprise inspection. "You haven't signed up for your holiday committee shift," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. "I didn't realize it was required," I answered, trying to stay polite. "It's not required," she replied, with that thin smile she used when she was about to make something required. "But it's expected." Expected. That was her favorite word. Expected lawns. Expected decorations. Expected behavior. Expected obedience. That day, when I told her I wouldn't be joining any committees, her smile faded for just a second. And in that second, I saw something real behind the polished HOA mask. Something cold. Something vindictive. Right after that day, small problems started showing up around my property. Accidental scratches on my fence. A shattered solar light. A landscaping warning I never received but somehow got fined for. And the mailbox? That was the grand finale. At least that's what she thought. The neighbors pretended not to see. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they'd learned what ignoring her cost, and decided silence was easier. But I couldn't afford silence anymore. Not when the attacks were getting closer, sharper, more intentional. The third time my mailbox was hit, I realized this wasn't about an HOA rule. It wasn't even about power. It was about me. About the fact that I didn't fall in line. About the fact that I didn't fear her the way others did. And people like Karen? They feed off fear. When you don't give them any, they try to take it from you. So that night, after sweeping the driveway and letting the anger settle into something quieter, something steadier, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. I wrote down everything that had happened. Dates, times, patterns, her driving routes, her routines. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning protection. But as I wrote, something unexpected happened. I started remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. Times growing up when I'd watched my father deal with difficult neighbors. Never with violence, always with cleverness. Removing himself from their reach but not from the fight. "Some battles aren't worth winning with fists," he used to say. "Win them with patience. Win them with strategy." Maybe that's why the idea came to me so clearly. A solution that was legal, fair, and impossible for her to manipulate. A mailbox she couldn't knock down. A mailbox she couldn't control. A mailbox she wouldn't see coming. But even as the plan formed, another thought crept in. Something I tried to ignore. Karen wasn't the type to back down. She wasn't the type to accept defeat. She wasn't the type to let someone like me slip out of her grasp without a fight. So what would she do when she realized she couldn't intimidate me anymore? How far would she go? I didn't know it yet, but she had already started planning her next move. And it was much worse than anything she'd done before. The day after Karen rolled past my broken mailbox with that smug little smirk, I expected things to calm down. I told myself maybe she'd gotten whatever satisfaction she wanted. Maybe 3 ruined mailboxes were enough for her. Maybe she'd finally move on to someone else. But when someone like Karen believes they're losing control over you, they don't step back. They push harder. And that's exactly what she did. It started with a letter. Not the usual typed HOA warnings she liked to send out. This one was handwritten, slipped under my door early in the morning before the sun even came up. The handwriting was sharp, almost carved into the paper. Your property has been observed violating several HOA standards. Failure to comply may result in further action. No specifics. No signature. Just a threat wrapped in official-sounding words. But the part that bothered me most wasn't the letter. It was the fact that she'd walked up to my door before dawn. That meant she wasn't just annoyed. She was watching, tracking, waiting for a mistake. And suddenly, my plan for the mailbox didn't feel like a simple fix anymore. Felt like a line I was choosing to draw. Once I installed it, the unspoken war would go from quiet sabotage to something direct. For the first time, I hesitated. Maybe it was fear, maybe caution, maybe that old habit of avoiding conflict. But the hesitation didn't last long because later that afternoon, something else happened. Something that told me I wasn't imagining the escalation. My neighbor, Mark, walked over. He never did that. He was one of those guys who stayed out of everything, rarely leaving his house except for yard work. But he looked worried, glancing over his shoulder as if Karen might pop out of the bushes. "I heard about the mailbox," he said softly. "You okay?" I nodded, but he didn't seem convinced. He lowered his voice even more. "Just be careful. She doesn't like being challenged." That sentence unsettled me more than the letter had. I asked him why. He shifted uncomfortably, the way someone does when they want to help but are afraid of consequences. "Just remember the Thompsons? They lived here before you." Of course I remembered. A quiet couple who left suddenly last year. "No good vie. No explanation." "What about them?" I asked. Mark hesitated, then said, "They stood up to her. Over something small. I think it was a fence or a shed. And then suddenly they were getting violations every week. Fines. Harassment. Until they couldn't take it anymore." His eyes drifted to Karen's house across the street. "She makes life miserable for the people she can't control." That stuck with me long after he left. Because it meant this wasn't about a mailbox. This was a pattern. And I was now the newest target. That night, while working in my garage, assembling the framework for the reinforced mailbox, a thought kept bothering me. Something I'd been pushing aside but couldn't ignore anymore. What if my plan made things worse? What if standing up to her escalated the situation beyond something I could manage? Yet the more I questioned myself, the clearer things became. If I let her intimidate me, she'd never stop. People like her feed on weakness. If I didn't draw a line now, she'd keep pushing until my life wasn't mine anymore. But even with that realization, something strange happened while I worked. My mind drifted to the past again. Something I hadn't thought about in years. My mother used to say, "Protecting your home isn't just about walls and locks. It's about knowing when something crosses into your peace." Maybe that's why the garage felt different that night. The work wasn't just practical, it was personal. It was reclaiming something. But just as I tightened the final bolt on the new metal frame, I heard footsteps outside. Not fast ones, slow, careful, deliberate. The kind that make your heart tap against your ribs. I killed the garage light. Silence. Then a faint scrape along the side of the house. Someone was there. I watched the shadow move under the streetlight. It wasn't tall. It wasn't rushed. Paused at my driveway. Stared. And then walked away. I didn't see a face, but I didn't need to. Only one person walked around the neighborhood with that level of entitlement. Karen. But why had she come to my house at night? What was she looking for? And what had she seen? I wouldn't get an answer yet. But the next morning, when I checked my security camera footage, something else became clear. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She hadn't just walked past my driveway. She had stopped at the exact spot where I'd planned to install the new mailbox. She stood there for several seconds, almost as if she already knew something was coming. But how? That question would follow me for days. And the answer, when it finally came, would be far more twisted than I expected. I barely slept after watching the footage of Karen stopping at the exact spot where the new mailbox would go. It wasn't a coincidence. Couldn't be. She knew something. Or she suspected something. Either way, it meant I no longer had the luxury of time. By sunrise, I was back in the garage, tightening bolts and adjusting measurements, making sure every part of the reinforced mailbox system was perfect. My hands shook. Not from fear, but from the pressure building inside me. I wasn't just installing metal into the ground. I was preparing for a confrontation I didn't ask for but could no longer avoid. All morning, I kept glancing out the window, waiting for her silver SUV to appear. Didn't. Not once. The street felt too quiet, too calm, like the air before a storm finally breaks. Around noon, I stepped outside to start the installation. I'd chosen the middle of the day on purpose. Karen preferred nighttime prowling and early morning intimidation. Afternoon sunlight made people like her uncomfortable, too exposed, too visible. But even in broad daylight, I felt watched. While installing the foundation, I noticed something odd. Across the street, Karen's curtains were tightly shut. She never kept them closed during the day. She liked seeing everything. She liked being seen. But today, nothing. I pushed the thought aside and kept working. Every strike of the hammer echoed deeper than it should have. The metal frame settled into the ground with a weight that felt symbolic. Like I was planting something more than steel. Something unmovable. Something that finally pushed back. And maybe that's what bothered me the most. Because as much as I wanted to protect my home, part of me wondered if I was taking things too far. If I was becoming stubborn out of pride. Or wounded ego. Or something darker. The moral dilemma tugged at me the entire time. Was I defending myself? Or challenging her? Either way, there was no turning back now. Midway through the installation, Mark walked over again. This time he didn't look nervous. He looked scared. "You shouldn't be doing this alone," he whispered. "It's just a mailbox," I said, trying to calm him. "No," he replied, eyes darting to Karen's house. "It's not." Before I could ask him what he meant, his phone buzzed. He checked the screen, and his face drained of color. Without saying another word, he backed away and hurried into his house, shutting the door behind him. Something was happening. Something I wasn't seeing. And it was happening today. I finished installing the base and took a step back. It looked clean, solid, almost industrial. The kind of mailbox no car could dent, let alone destroy. For the first time in days, I felt something like relief. But it didn't last. Because the moment I started attaching the upper structure, I heard it. The rumble. Deep, slow, familiar. Karen's SUV. It turned the corner with unnatural caution, crawling down the street like a predator moving through tall grass. The vehicle stopped directly across from my house. Engine running. Windows dark. She didn't move. She didn't get out. She just watched. My heart hammered, but my hands kept working. Slower now, deliberate, careful. I didn't want her to see fear. I didn't want her to know she was getting to me. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Her SUV wasn't the only car on the street. Another one I didn't recognize pulled up behind her. A sleek black sedan. Windows tinted even darker. It didn't belong to anyone in our neighborhood. And when a man stepped out, tall, thin, dressed in a blazer despite the heat, I felt a cold rush run through me. He walked to Karen's window. She rolled it down just enough for him to lean in. They talked. Not long. Not loud. Just enough. Then he nodded once, got back into his car, and drove away without looking at me. Karen stayed parked for another full minute. Silence. Engine humming. Then she rolled forward slowly, stopping directly at the end of my driveway. The window lowered an inch. "You should reconsider," she said quietly. No smirk this time. No threat disguised as a rule. Just that single sentence, delivered in a tone I had never heard from her before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't intimidation. It was warning. Cold. Controlled. Final. And then she drove off. Fast. Almost too fast. turning the corner and disappearing again. I stood there frozen. Reconsider what? The installation? The confrontation? My place in the neighborhood? Or something bigger? As I tried to calm my breathing, I noticed something on the ground where her SUV had stopped. A small piece of paper pressed against the curb by the weight of her tire. I picked it up. A photocopied document. Not official. Not HOA related. A list. Names. Addresses. Dates. Some crossed out. Some underlined. And mine circled in red. Before I could process what it meant, a shadow passed behind me. Close. Too close. I turned. Someone was standing at the edge of my yard. Not Karen. Someone else. Someone I had never seen before. And they weren't alone. What happened next would push everything into the breaking point. And this time, there was no backing out. The figure standing at the edge of my yard didn't move at first. He just watched me the way someone studies a puzzle they're trying to solve. Not threatening. Not friendly. Just measuring. And something about the stillness in his posture told me this wasn't some lost visitor or new neighbor. He knew exactly where he was. He knew exactly who I was. And he'd been waiting. I swallowed hard, tightening my grip on the paper with my circled name. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. He stepped forward slowly, hands visible, as if trying not to spook me. "You don't know me," he said softly, "but we need to talk. Now, before she comes back." My chest tightened. The man in the blazer. Karen's warning. The list. And now this stranger. Everything was connected. But before I could respond, a door slammed from across the street. Mark, my quiet, nervous neighbor, was rushing toward us, waving his arms, panic all over his face. "No, don't talk to him," he shouted. The stranger's eyes flicked toward Mark, irritated. "He deserves the truth." "Not from you," Mark snapped. I looked between them, confused and suddenly very aware that I was standing in the crossfire of something much deeper than a neighborhood feud. "Someone tell me what's going on," I demanded. The stranger sighed and reached into his pocket. For a second my heart raced, until he pulled out a folded photo. He handed it to me without a word. It was Karen, but not the Karen I knew. Younger, happier, smiling in a way I had never seen. And standing next to her was the stranger. My stomach dropped. "I'm her brother," he said quietly. The world felt like it tilted. Her brother. The one people whispered about. The one no one had ever seen. The one she never mentioned. But why was he here? Why now? Why with my name circled on a list? Before I could speak, he continued. "She's not who you think she is," he said. "And this isn't about a mailbox. It never was." I felt the anger rising. "Then what is it about?" "She's been harassing me since." "Because she thinks you're the one who reported her." He cut in. "Reported her for what?" He exchanged a look with Mark. One that confirmed he wasn't lying. "For stealing money from the HOA fund." My breath caught in my throat. "What?" "She took thousands," Mark whispered. "Everyone thought the board knew. But it wasn't the board. It was you she blamed. But I never reported her." "I know," her brother said. "Someone else did. But she became convinced it was you. She obsessively checked board minutes.
Surveillance foutage.
Member complaints. She built a whole story in her head. And once she decided you were the enemy, she came after you," Mark finished. The pieces slammed together in my mind. The sudden fines. The accidents. The nighttime stalking. The scribbled warnings. The SUV slowing near my driveway. The list of names. I had become her obsession. Her target. "But why are you here?" I asked her brother, my voice tightening. He took a slow breath. "Because she's getting worse. And I can't stop her alone." His eyes drifted toward the newly installed mailbox. Heavy steel. Locked in concrete. Unmistakably unbreakable. "That mailbox," he said softly. "It's going to push her over the edge." A chill ran through me. "Why?" I whispered. "Because she needs to feel in control. And when she loses it, she becomes reckless. Dangerous." I didn't want to believe him. I didn't want this to be anything more than a bizarre HOA conflict. But the fear in Mark's eyes, the exhaustion in her brother's voice, the red circle around my name, they all pointed to the same truth. Karen wasn't just angry. She was unraveling. Before I could respond, a car engine roared at the end of the street. Not slow, not cautious. Fast. Too fast. And the moment the vehicle turned the corner, my blood ran cold. It was Karen's SUV. But she wasn't driving normally. She wasn't cruising. She wasn't watching. She was accelerating. Straight toward my driveway. Her brother's face went pale. She saw the mailbox. Mark grabbed my arm. Get inside. Now. But I couldn't move. Not yet. Not with something else catching my eye. Behind Karen's speeding SUV, a second car turned sharply following her. The same black sedan from earlier. Only this time, there were two people inside. And they weren't trying to stop her. They were chasing her. Or escorting her. Couldn't tell. All I knew was this. Whatever was coming next was bigger and darker than anything I had imagined. And the moment her SUV lined up with my driveway, everything exploded into motion. I didn't remember opening the front door. All I knew was that 1 second I was staring at the frozen feet of the camera, and the next I was outside, the cold night air slapping my face awake. My pulse felt like it was punching my ribs from the inside. Karen's SUV was parked crooked near the curb, engine still running, headlights flooding the street in a dull yellow haze. And there she was, standing next to my mailbox. But she wasn't touching it. She wasn't even looking at it. She was staring down at the ground, at the package lying half open beside her foot. My decoy package. The one she wasn't supposed to ever see up close. I slowed, my boots crunching on the gravel. She heard me before she saw me. She jerked her head up, eyes wide. Wider than any caught red-handed HOA Karen moment should have made them. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't anger. It was fear. Real fear. What did you put in that thing? She said, her voice shaking in a way that instantly killed the idea that she was here for another one of her petty power trips. What are you talking about? I asked, stopping a few feet away. She pointed toward the opened flap. There's something in there. Something that shouldn't exist. My stomach fell. Not out of fear, but because I suddenly understood why someone like her, someone who thrived on control, would look so rattled. She'd opened the wrong package. The real wrong package. The one that wasn't a decoy. The one I didn't even know had been delivered. The one I'd been warned explicitly not to open. The one from Mark. I felt my hands go numb. Mark, my brother. Mark, who'd disappeared 7 months earlier. Mark, whose last message to me was a voicemail saying, if something happens to me, and a package ever shows up, don't open it. Don't let anyone open it. I thought he was joking. I thought he was being dramatic. Now I wasn't so sure. Karen took a shaky step backward. I didn't mean to open it. I thought it was one of those porch pirate traps. I was just checking. I swear I didn't know. For the first time, she didn't sound like a tyrant in a cardigan. She sounded human, terrified, fragile. I crouched beside the package, careful not to touch the thing inside. At first, it looked like a device, small, dense, metal plating with strange engravings around the edges. Then I noticed something else. The faint hum. Low, steady, mechanical, but not quite. Almost like breathing. What did he send me? I whispered. Karen hugged herself, backing even farther away. Whatever it is, it's dangerous. You need to call someone. You need to. A sudden, violent crack split the air. We both froze. The mailbox. My steel-reinforced monster of a mailbox. Jerked hard, as if something inside it had slammed against the walls. Twice. 3 times. Then the lock snapped clean off, shooting across the yard like a bullet. My heart tried to climb out of my throat. This wasn't possible. Nothing was inside that mailbox. Nothing except wiring, alarms, and a concrete core. Karen's voice trembled. It's reacting to that thing. Oh my God. What did you two do? I didn't have an answer. The mailbox door slowly swung open, creaking like a horror movie cliché. Inside, the shadows seemed deeper, wrong, almost moving. For a moment, the air around us felt thick, heavy, like the atmosphere itself was being pulled toward the open box. Then, just as suddenly, the hum from the device in the package stopped. Everything stilled. Karen and I stared at the mailbox, waiting for something to leap out, or crawl out, or explode. Nothing happened. Just silence. Long, suffocating silence. And then light. A sharp, blinding flash burst from inside the mailbox, sweeping across the yard with a force that knocked both of us backward. I hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision swimming. When I blinked my eyes open, the mailbox door was hanging loose, and the inside was empty. Completely empty. The device was gone too. So was Karen. For one horrible heartbeat, I thought she'd been vaporized. But then I spotted her, half-conscious, lying near her SUV, groaning. She was alive. But the package and whatever came out of it were nowhere to be found. I staggered to my feet, clutching the mailbox for balance. The metal was still warm. Too warm. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A new voicemail. Unknown number. A voice I hadn't heard in 7 months spoke through the speaker. Cracked, frantic, breathless. If you got this, it means the device activated. Don't try to follow it. Don't try to find me. Whatever you do, don't let it return. Then the message cut off. No explanation. No instructions. Just one last sentence, barely audible. It wasn't meant for our world. I stared at the ruined mailbox, at the empty street, at the glowing timestamp on my phone screen. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I realized something. Karen wasn't my enemy. She might have just saved my life. And whatever escaped that mailbox tonight was now out there, somewhere in the neighborhood, still moving, still searching, and maybe coming back. For a long moment, I stood there in my yard, staring at the mailbox that had become ground zero for something I still couldn't fully understand. The night felt different now, quieter, almost hollow, like the world had taken a deep breath and was waiting to see what I'd do next. My hands were still shaking, and my ears were ringing from the flash, but my mind was painfully clear. Whatever escaped wasn't something meant for our world. And my brother, wherever he was, had known that long before any of us. By the time I stumbled toward Karen, she was sitting up against her SUV, clutching her wrist but lucid. Her face, usually scrunched into disapproval or judgment, looked strangely soft in the glow of the streetlights. I didn't mean for any of this, she muttered, wincing. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I shook my head. You didn't cause it. You just opened the wrong thing at the wrong time. She laughed. A tired, broken laugh that sounded too human for the person I'd been fighting for months. Story of my life. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Two people who'd spent months locked in some ridiculous battle over a mailbox, now sitting in the aftermath of something cosmic, something neither of us could name. It struck me how small our fights had been, how petty, how meaningless compared to the thing that had just slipped through our fingers. Why do you do it? I asked suddenly. The complaints, the rules, all of it. She looked away, swallowing hard. Because if I don't control something, then everything else in my life falls apart. My husband left. My kids barely speak to me. The HOA is all I have. There was no judgment in her voice, just quiet truth. And with that truth came something unexpected, understanding. I'd never thought I'd feel that for her. As I helped her to her feet, she whispered, I'm sorry, for the mailbox, for everything. I nodded slowly. I'm sorry too. I should have talked to you instead of turning it into a war. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. How a feud built on stubbornness had ended with something neither of us could have predicted. But maybe that was the point. Sometimes life throws you into madness not to punish you, but to force perspective onto the pieces of yourself you've ignored. We sat on the curb, waiting for her breathing to steady. The street was still quiet, too quiet, but calm enough that the terror of the last hour began to settle into something softer, something reflective. What happens now? She asked. I looked at the mailbox. The broken lock. The scorch mark on the ground. The spot where the device had disappeared like a spark into the wind. I don't know, I said honestly. But whatever it was, it's out there. And I don't think this is the last time I'll see it. You shouldn't face it alone, she said, her voice small but sincere. Whatever comes next, I owe you. I want to help. That surprised me. But maybe the world has a strange way of pushing the right people into your life, even if they show up disguised as your worst headache. The next morning, after she'd gone home to rest, I replayed my brother's voicemail over and over. His tone wasn't afraid. It wasn't panicked. It was regretful. And in that regret, I realized something. He wasn't warning me because he thought I couldn't handle it. He was warning me because he didn't want me carrying the same burden he had. He wanted to protect me even from afar. I walked to the mailbox one last time, running my fingers along the warped metal. It wasn't just a mailbox anymore. It was a reminder of what I'd lost, what I'd survived, and what might still be coming. Maybe the device was gone. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe the tear between whatever world it was from and ours was temporary or permanent. But I wasn't the same person who'd installed this mailbox out of spite. I wasn't the same person who'd seen the world as neighbors, nuisances, and rules. Karen wasn't the same either. Something had changed in both of us, something irreversible. Maybe that's what real change looks like. Not sudden. Not dramatic. Just two people realizing that life is bigger than grudges. And sometimes the enemy you imagine is just another human trying not to fall apart. As I turned back toward the house, I whispered the words that had been echoing in my head since the moment the voicemail ended. It wasn't meant for our world, but maybe the lesson was. And if you've made it this far, if this story pulled you in, shook you, or made you think, then do one thing before you go. Hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe, because sometimes the strangest stories are the truest ones. And this one isn't finished.